Hey, this is Stephen Amell, and you are listening to Tomorrow's Legends, the podcast. Don't fail your city.
"30 years ago, one of the greatest animated series of all time went off the air. But now it's returning to our screens, and the mutants will rise again. X-Men 97 continues the story of Wolverine, Rogue, Storm, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and more as they try to move forward from the loss of their leader, Professor Charles Xavier. Join Havoc and Shadowcat on this new adventure as they bring you the stories of X-Men 97. This is Tomorrow's Legends.
That is us, Shadowcat. Welcome, fellow mutants, to X-Men 97. It's apparently a two-parter week as we get a split episode with two different stories. This is episode 4 called Motendo and Lifedeath Part 1. I am Havoc.
And time out a moment. We in a video game or another dimension? I'm Shadowcat.
That's a valid question. A very valid question. And I gotta just say, every time our theme music kicks in, I just start rocking out. Like, I love the X-Men theme.
Yeah, I get like a second wind hearing it play.
Totally. Just because the and it ramps up and just, I get goosebumps. It's cool. I love it. So we actually have some news for the first time this season. We are going to dive in some news because Shadowcat brought some stuff for us. Here we go.
We interrupt this podcast for a special report.
What you got for us?
All right, so we have a couple different things this week. Some of them are catch-ups that I probably should have known about earlier, but we have them now.
All right.
So first off, from a Deadline article that was from March 25th, after the first two episodes dropped, they reported that the premiere of X-Men 97 is now the most watched full-length animated series premiere on Disney+. So that's over What If, that's over all the Star Wars animated stuff. So we're now the top-rated on Disney+ for animated series. And within the first 5 days of release, they tracked that it garnered 4 million views globally, which in the streaming age, that is pretty dang good.
Yes. Holy cow. Like that. I remember seeing this sometime last week that, it's the most watched animated premiere. Like, that's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
So that's very, good metrics, I think, of, people want the X-Men, but also just people want new, I think, different mediums from, the MCU shows and things right now. We just want kind of a different thing.
Yes. But I think you're right. I think X-Men especially, there is a craving for X-Men to get back to what they once were with Marvel in charge. Not CBS Fox, not someone else that owns the property and doesn't know what the heck to do with the characters. Marvel, let them do the X-Men the way they're meant to be. I think people are excited about that.
Mm-hmm. And then all of that news, that kind of leads me into my second point here, which Jeff, X-Force11, actually shared in our Facebook group. So X-Men 97 has officially been renewed for not only a second season, but a third season as well.
I didn't even know they got renewed for a second season, and yet they're already announcing a third one. That's crazy.
Yeah, I knew that there were talks that there were already scripts are in for a potential season 2, but I did not know that was already confirmed as well. So when that came out that they're nope, third season already, that is great news for us. That means we're going to have new X-Men media for a few years at least.
Did you realize what you signed yourself up to all of a sudden as a podcast host?
It's fine. Talking about X-Men, it's good. I'll take it for a couple of years.
Yes. Yeah, now it'll just matter as to when they're going to release it, because we got 10 episodes this season. Are they going to wait an entire year for season 2, or are they going to drop it late in the year? It makes me wonder what the timeline is for that.
Yeah, hard to tell this day and age, because streaming makes everything different. We're don't really follow a lot of the same spring fall releases as much as we used to with networks. So and I know a lot of things have been at least a year apart in production wise. But this one, I don't know, because animation can take really long. But even with 10 episodes, we'll see. We'll see. We have no idea what the production timeline is right now. So maybe we'll get a little bit of a hint at the very end of when the season ends, if they'll have a potential release date for maybe like an early 2025 or something of that nature.
Right. So that announcement probably, when they realized they've got 4 million views or whatever, like it's probably as soon as that news broke to them, they're like, damn it, greenlight it, let's keep going.
Yeah, I think hopefully that inspired some executives to put a little money behind it.
Yes, and I bet you the studio execs for the cinematic universe are probably just going, oh yeah, we're ready for the movies now.
Yeah, I know they've been building, hopefully, behind the scenes for the past couple of years for that. So I'm just waiting for news on the live action front as well.
Oh, a live action Rogue is all I want. A real Rogue, not the one that we got that walks around being all sad and does nothing with her powers at all. I want this Rogue flying around on my screen.
I feel like we'll get more news after Deadpool and Wolverine comes out in July. Because that'll probably lead us into what's going on with the X-Men in the Marvel in the MCU. So
right.
I'm not expecting to know anything live action wise until after July.
Yeah, it's okay. We got 3 years of this to do, so that's fine.
Yes. So something else that I thought was interesting in that article is that there were some quotes from Brad Winterbaum, who's one of the EPs on the show, and he said that they were only pulling stories from the comics from the 70s through the 90s to adapt for this current season and the next, and that season 3 could possibly start to push into the early 2000s comic storylines. So that was really interesting, since I know we were speculating, since there's been 30 years in between, like, are they going to only stick to some of the older stuff, or are they going to do a mix of old and new? So it sounds like they're not adapting some of the newer stuff. We've had some like Easter eggs and references to more modern contemporary stories. But it sounds like they're sticking with earlier stories that would have been around in the comics in the 90s, as if the show was actually taking place in 97.
Which, you know what, I think that's actually okay, though, because it gives them... They've got 30 years of content to draw from. If they jumped to try to tell modern stories that have just happened recently, they're going to run out real fast. And then you can't go backwards in time and, by the way, we just finished this 12-episode arc on a 2012 storyline. Now we're going to jump back to 1975. Fans are just going to be like, what? No. So I like that they're sticking in a chronological fashion, because we got so many stories we can tell. But if they tell them as fast as they told the Inferno storyline, we're going to run out fast anyway.
Yeah. I'm interested on that front. But yeah, I like, I've said before, I like a lot of the stuff from the 80s, especially, and the late 70s and stuff. The 90s weren't my favorite of things, but there's a lot of famous storylines. That's how where Age of Apocalypse come from. That's where a whole ton of stuff is,
right.
Which they did do versions of in the original, but I can see Apocalypse coming back again.
Oh, for sure.
But so that'll be interesting. I do like a lot of the contemporary stuff, but it'll be interesting to see, hopefully, a lot of the 80s things kind of come into life, as we've seen with Inferno and things already.
Yeah.
And then we're still in the news section. We have one more point here.
I love it. This is good.
So, yeah, I found out only recently. I didn't know this was actually happening even before the series started. But Marvel is actually releasing a limited series of X-Men 97 prequel comics that will coincide with the show.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. So it's only going to be, the run's only going to be 4 issues, but they'll kind of serve as a precursor to the series, filling in some of those gaps from the year between the end of the original series until the premiere of 97 in Showtime that year.
Yep.
So we'll get some more backstory on why Bishop is in the present, more Mr. Sinister information. I haven't read any of them yet because there's only 1 issue out at the moment.
Okay.
But now that I know they exist, I'm definitely going to go pick them up. So the first issue is available on Marvel Unlimited, or you can find them at your local comic book store. And it looks as though they're going to do a monthly release, with issue number 2 coming out on April 10th.
Okay, so next week. Awesome.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what is the release dates? How many are coming out? So you answered all those questions. I definitely have to go find that one right away. And you know what? And we can do a special episode covering all 4 issues if you want.
Yeah. Yeah, once they all come out.
Or we can do 1 per issue, whatever. We could, like, bonus content.
Depends on how much is packed into each one.
That's true. Awesome stuff, Shadowcat. That's what I like. You're bringing us the goods. That is fantastic. A lot to look forward to and a lot of excitement. Boy, X-Men, it's a big hit, and I am so happy about that. That means they're going to be here. X-Men is going to really take over a lot of Marvel. Because I think, like, truly, if you look at everything that's happened in the last 10 years, this superhero fatigue is a real thing. I mean, look at the last few movies that Marvel has released. Nobody's going to see them. Everybody's really tired of what they have out there. I think X-Men is going to be the huge kick in the butt that Marvel needs to get back on track.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting just looking at it from the comics history perspective, because X-Men and, like, Fantastic Four used to be, like, their biggest titles back in, 70s, 80s, all of that stuff. Well, actually, X-Men was the first one was almost risk of being canceled in the mid 70s.
Yeah,
until...
I think the 80s is when they really started going.
Yeah, when they did the Giant Size X-Men #1 is when it really came back to life with the new team.
Yeah. And Spider-Man and X-Men, I would say, were their top.
And Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, Spider-Man. Because those are the ones, like, Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Spider-Man are the properties that they sold off to other companies when they were about to go bankrupt, because those were their big guns.
Yes.
Like, Avengers were still, like, B-level at that point, all of the ones that we have now, but then because Marvel only had them to use for the MCU, it kind of flipped, did a 180, so, like, Avengers got super big, and X-Men got kind of pushed back, and all of that, so now it's kind of, the resurgence is kind of happening now that they're back with Marvel.
Could you imagine if they started the MCU with X-Men and Spider-Man? Like, how different would it have been?
It would be so different. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't even know, like, how to picture what it would be if they started that way.
Yeah. And the one problem I see, too, though, is, like, out of everything that CBS Fox did with X-Men, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine is really the only thing that sticks that was hugely successful. And for Marvel to try to go on and redo that's, I think, is going to be the hard part, because I don't know if Hugh Jackman is the one that's going to sign on. There's been talks about Mr. Harry Potter himself playing Wolverine. There's talks
Daniel Radcliffe.
Daniel Radcliffe. There's talks of Henry Cavill. I think I even saw Jake Gyllenhaal attached to it for a second. So there's all these actors that are being rumored to take on the role, but I don't know if anyone is ever going to accept anyone else other than Hugh Jackman. But the thing is he's aging out.
Yeah, I mean, he was going to be done after Logan, but, I mean, now he's doing Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, but I think he's definitely done after that. Like, we need a younger actor for Wolverine if he's going to stay for another, like, 10 years in the MCU.
Exactly. So that's one sticky point to see, because they can recast and restart the entire franchise with who they want. And I would love, I mean, there's been so many fan castings out there, but I would love to sit there and maybe we could do that for fun, put together a list of who we think could play all the X-Men. Because it's too easy to pick A-list superstars. We got to dig deep and find some because you don't want.
That's what I would prefer.
Yeah,
I would prefer. I don't love the trend that's happening right now. Is like everything has to be like an A-list, because that's not how, I mean, most actors got their start, obviously.
No, exactly.
Like Hugh Jackman, like Wolverine was his first like big role, and then it stuck with him.
The world got to know him because of Wolverine.
Yeah, I would love to see smaller actors, less known ones, being cast in these parts instead of names I already know, which are hard for me to sometimes also detach from other roles they've done. Yeah. So seeing them as that, so it can be hard.
So lots of fun stuff to look forward to. That's awesome. Great news section for today. Now next week, maybe we're not going to have anything. Good stuff. Well, another quick reminder, we are part of the Cybercast Network, and that has a bunch of shows. You're listening to Tomorrow's Legends right now, which is covering X-Men, and we got Superman and Lois coming up in the late fall, and the Tomorrow People is next on the list for them over there. And then we got Dive into DC with Silver Fox and Green Butterfly, and they are just wrapping up their Swamp Thing coverage. Go check them out over there. They do great work on their show. And of course, The Mandalore is right in the middle of season 3 and the final season of The Bad Batch. And oh my gosh, did you watch the 2 episodes this week?
I have not watched this season.
The Bad Batch is the one Star Wars show that they are not scared to go dark and into depressing territory. Wow, this two-parter this week is, whew, yeah, they're not treading lightly on some issues. That's insane. So check those shows out. We got lots going on the Cybercast Network. Let's get into our ratings and reviews for this episode 4 that is called Motendo and Lifedeath Part 1.
Like, what is it with guys and explosions anyway?
So, we started really strong, Shadowcat. Really strong. And then this episode came along, and I just, after a couple runs through it, I couldn't find the same level of enjoyment in this one. I'm only giving it a 6. Quarters wasted on this game. Like I said, after a strong start, the first 2 weeks, we get what I'm calling the first fail and almost a wasted episode in this limited run of only 10. And I don't mean it's a wasted episode to watch. I just mean when you only have 10 episodes in a season, I kind of get greedy and expect all 10 episodes to be really good. You only have 10. You don't have time to give us a wah-wah kind of episode. That's just where I feel. Part of the reason is because I've never been a huge Jubilee fan, and I'm not the biggest Storm fan. I like Storm, but she was at the bottom of the list out of the main group for if I were to list them in order of favorites. And then, so sure enough, this episode focuses on those 2 characters, the 2 that I have my least interest in. So it's definitely hard to keep up excitement for this episode. But it also kind of had a weak story to me, and there was something about the animation I found, especially during the Jubilee stuff, and it wasn't because we were seeing 16-bit arcade graphics. That's not what I'm talking about. But I found that the animation, and especially with Magneto and stuff, it just seemed like it lacked polish this week, and I don't know why. It just did not feel as good or as high quality, and overall, it was a little empty. I watched this episode and I just felt empty. It's like, dang it! I wanted better stuff to talk about. So it's only a 6.
Okay. All right, so we might be on some of the opposite ends for some of our discussion for things, but I didn't give it too much higher. I'm at a 7.5 this week. 7.5 levels, still the big boss.
That's lower for you, yeah.
It is. So it wasn't my favorite of the bunch either. It wasn't the strongest episode, but I still enjoyed it quite a bit. We're still having the pacing issue that we started talking about last week. Except this time it's in a different form because it was broken into 2 stories.
Oh, man.
But I still think things were getting rushed through to get to certain points. And it would have been stronger if we had just focused on one or the other.
Yep.
But I did enjoy a lot of the meta aspects to Jubilee's story. And I love Storm. She's my number 3 on my top 20 X-Men list. So
on top 20.
I keep a top 20, yeah.
You know what? For bonus coverage or bonus stuff, we should do our top lists just so we have an understanding where we both stand on our characters.
Yes.
That'll be fun.
Yeah. There's so many X-Men characters in the comics, I keep a top 20 instead of just
20.
Like
we
a
might
top
have to
10.
bring it down to a top 10. Let's do a top 10. Okay.
So for me, it was good seeing her and Forge together, but I also come from knowing these comics, so I'm looking at this from someone who's isn't familiar with that. I could definitely see why could be some confusion or not understanding the full story coming into it that way. But again, I feel like even for a shorter runtime animated series, we could definitely be better served with the things being fleshed out more before we rush into the big story points. But also, both of us got our little tiny cameos of both of our namesakes this week. So
that is true. I missed Shadowcat. I don't think I had her. I know I saw Havoc, but
yeah, it was very small.
Okay.
We'll get to it down in our
You'll
Easter
point
egg
out,
section.
I'm sure. Yeah. Cool, good stuff. Well, I mean, I'm not going to come into this all negative and cranky.
Yeah.
It just wasn't my favorite episode. I was just a little bit ho-hum about it. So we still got lots of fun stuff to talk to. You might actually run the show mostly tonight because you've got way bigger thoughts in here than I was able to put together. So let's get into our discussion.
My daddy always said two's company and three's an eavesdropper.
So, the opening sequence, this might be a running tally of a couple that we're keeping track of. I think I saw a couple new faces in the opening that I don't remember seeing before. That was Polaris and Emma Frost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm correct. Okay, good.
You are correct. There are a couple more, but you got those
Okay,
two.
well, you can add in a couple more. So,
Yes.
the reason I noticed those ones mostly because I have always liked Polaris. For those who don't know, she is Magneto's other daughter, sister to the Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver, which it's going to be interesting to see if we get a cameo appearance from Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch too, because those two characters, which we've already seen in the cinematic universe, they always get divided between whether are they part of the X-Men or are they part of the Avengers. And I'm curious what this animated series is going to do with that, because they just showed us Polaris, so we know she's there. That means the other two have to be around.
Yeah. They were in the original in like 2 episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, with MCU, Marvel, all the fun, like they couldn't use mutants for a long time because they couldn't use the X-Men. It's a very strange place with them because they've been retconned as not mutants and mutants in the comics multiple times.
Yeah.
So they're in a weird spot.
It's so weird, and I mean, maybe you can fill us in a little bit on Polaris, because I remember she was the one that was born with virtually the same abilities as her father's Magneto, just control over magnetism, but she struggled with the magnetism. Actually affected her mental ability, like she wasn't able to contain the power, and it basically like fritzed out her brain, and she struggled with identity issues and different things like that, and she never got to be the full-on hero that she could have been because of that.
Yeah, and her powers activated like later in life. She was a bit older. Most like mutant abilities tend to activate when you're like a teenager,
Right.
Or sometimes younger. But hers activated a bit later. She was I think older teenager or young adult by the time when hers activated. So she didn't know she was a mutant for a long time too.
Right, and she lost control often, and
Yeah,
it always people always struggle. Is she a villain or is she a good guy? Because she just lost control, and she having mental instability. It seemed like she was a villain, but I don't think she really meant it to be like that.
no, it depends on what writer has her and different things. She got possessed a whole lot in the comics.
Yeah,
All the time. Her and Havoc both.
Yeah.
This thing with getting possessed a lot. I believe she's actually like bipolar in the comics, which was part of what you said, like she couldn't have full control over everything. But they've been able to dive into that a lot more in kind of the more recent comics. I was always liked Polaris, but I didn't become like a huge fan of her until the Krakoa era, which is like the past 5 years of comics, which super made her like super badass.
Cool.
In a really cool way. So, but yeah, she is cool. She's pretty cool.
I'll have to look into that, because I only know her from her Troubled stories. So. But I was still a big fan, because there was just something about her. I was like, yeah, she's pretty cool.
Yeah. So along that scene you mentioned in the opening credits, so that was from the one episode we got in the original series that included X Factor, which is the team that's shown. So Polaris is also actually holding your guy. Havoc is in that scene.
Yeah.
Very, very briefly. And then, of course, Forge is there, since this is his episode, but so is Iceman. Iceman is in the shot, too.
Oh.
He's just not all iced up. He's in his normal
He's
human look,
okay. That's
so.
probably why I didn't recognize him. Right. Cool.
Yeah. Yes, and then, like you said, Emma Frost was there, so there was also the scene with the Hellfire Club.
Hellfire Club. Thank you. I was struggling to remember their name. Yep.
Yes. So it looked like Xavier was trying to get into their mind or see something, and then you see Emma Frost kind of shutting him out. And then there's also a third added scene with Jubilee and Longshot from the original series with another Mojo tie-in.
What? Did I blink or something? Because Longshot was also, he's in my top 10 favorite X-Men, because I just love the power and control over luck. I loved him. I don't remember seeing him in this.
He had
Jeez.
two blink in your mouse moments, and that was one of them. So
probably when I was writing a note is when he appeared.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my god, Polaris is there. I'm scribbling down Polaris, and he probably flashed on screen and I missed it. Cool. I'll have to rewatch that. But Emma Frost, she has interesting abilities because she does have some pretty powerful psychic, or not, like mental telepathy and telekinesis abilities herself, but she also can turn her skin to diamond. So she's very well protected when she's diamond skinned, and she also has something else along those lines, right?
Just those two. So
okay.
Yeah, she was one of the first that was kind of introduced with this idea of a secondary mutation, where you had a second ability that wasn't related to your first one. So because she is a telepath, she's a very strong telepath, but then for her ability to turn into diamond didn't appear until the early 2000s in one of the runs.
Right.
So it was 20 years of just being a telepath until that happened.
Yeah. And she's also been one that, do we trust her? Yes, no, she's good, she's bad, she's there for the team. She was very similar to Magneto in that way. She didn't always agree with Charles Xavier of what he was doing. But they also, for the longest time, all through the 80s and 90s, she was always portrayed as this seductress type sexy lady walking around in nothing but a white bikini and a cape, she was always she was kind of like the power girl of the X-Men universe,
A bit, yeah. She has, they've gone a lot more into her full backstory since then. And she is one of the ones that started off as an antagonist, as a villain, was evil pretty much, and then kind of did a turnaround, and she's been on the X-Men team, the X-Men side, since the early 2000s.
She's even led them on a few missions.
Oh yeah, she's led a couple of them. She's a really main part to a lot of the X-Men stories now. Yeah. She's actually my top 10 as well. So.
She is cool. Yeah, she's pretty neat. Cool. Well, there you go. Just like that, we're getting, and we thought all the cameos would just be from Morph, but now we're seeing them in different spots. So
no morphs this episode.
No, I know. Well, yeah, we hardly had any X-Men this episode. It was just focused on the two. So jumping into the opening scene, we see everybody sitting around the kitchen table, and Rogue is sitting in between Magneto and Gambit, and it's so funny because both of the men are trying to please Rogue by offering her dessert and taking care of her and stuff. It's just so funny because Magneto's just rubbing it in Gambit's face that he's one-upping him every chance he gets, and you can just feel the tension building between the two of them.
Yeah. I both laughed at this scene and also felt bad for Gambit.
Totally.
The double meanings and the subtext behind everything they were saying was just dripping in their conversation. But you're right, the tension is totally there too. I feel like this is definitely going to come to a head soon. But in what way is my question. So is it going to be Gambit confronting Rogue? Will it be him trying to catch Magneto and Rogue together? Is there going to be some third party that exposes them? I don't know. Yeah. But I feel like it's going to be something kind of explosive.
And it shouldn't. I don't think it'll take that long with because it would be weird that with how fast they're pacing all the other stories. Why would they drag this out?
Right.
But yeah, something's going to happen because this scene was very spot on with yep, there's something between the two of them. They're fighting over Rogue, and she's not leaning either way. She just let them go at it and didn't say anything. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Now, talking about Rogue, her voice has changed. I know she had the one really long line, and we're going to hear it later on in the episode here. Her voice has changed a lot. It's a lot higher in tone now, and I'm just guessing. I guess with Lenore Zahn, who has voiced her all these years, it's just her because she's probably in her 60s now. I guess Lenore Zahn. I'll have to look that up, but she speaks like Rogue, but I'm really noticing the voice is not the same as it used to be.
Yeah, it has been 30 years, so
yeah,
aging, but it's still I can tell there's a difference, but it's still pretty close. I don't mind it at all.
No, I don't think it's bothering me. It's just noticeable. Yeah, and so I don't know if it's bothering me. It's just noticeable, and I guess I would have expected her voice to get maybe a little deeper because it's just making her sound younger than she is.
Right.
I'm just going to look this. I got her right here. She was born in 1959. So what does that make her?
Early 60s. 65?
Yeah. 65. And she's still voicing Rogue.
Yes.
She's going to be doing it for a couple years, so not bad.
I know.
Not bad. She's
they've all locked in their jobs for the next couple of years.
They just did. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then, so continuing in the scene, after all of the digs at each other there, we do get more of seeing kind of Magneto in charge, just in kind of everyday life, too. So this is kind of setting up the main bit of conflict with Jubilee's story, because she's upset that Magneto is being, so stringent. He's being pretty strict as the leader, even on her birthday, not seeing things from her point of view, and she can't see things from his point of view.
Yeah.
He's all about training and kind of sticking to that at the moment. Says she'll live longer if she learns to control her power, which is technically true, and not necessarily having the focus on the adolescent matters, which Jubilee is just caring about in this moment, which even in this scene, Magneto does point out that he grew up in the Holocaust, like his parents died when he was a child. So he didn't get much of a childhood, and he never really makes time for fun, which is Jubilee is all about fun. So you can kind of see that contrast between the two of them. But after, seeing the whole episode, I do wish there was a bit more of this conflict kind of build up beforehand, before they get trapped in the video game. Just makes things a bit more pointed, but I could see the path they were going with it.
Yeah, and maybe that'll be a storyline that goes through the season. Like,
right.
Magneto needs to loosen up a little bit.
Yeah.
And that might be part of his growth, because we all know Magneto. He's acting the exact same way he's always acted. So his story is probably, okay, in order for me to get the X-Men to trust me and accept me as their leader, I have to change a little bit too. So,
right. Yeah, we'll probably see it go both ways.
Yeah.
He'll rub off on the X-Men. The X-Men will rub off on him.
Yeah, because I mean, we talked about in the very first episode, I think he could be a very strong leader for them.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. No, good stuff there. I had to laugh because I didn't understand the title of the episode, Motendo. I'm like, Motendo?
Yeah.
Is that who's that? I've never heard of that character before. And I totally face slapped myself because I didn't clue in until we actually saw the video game console sitting on the little desk there, and it said Motendo, and oh my god, Nintendo, duh. Wow, that was hilarious.
Yeah. When we were looking at the episode title names before anything, I was looking at that and I was like, that doesn't sound like a storyline. I know that doesn't sound like anything. Yeah, I did not put it together. So I was, Mojo, Nintendo. There it is. That makes sense now.
Make Mojo and Nintendo. But what I liked when they actually showed the console, I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but it looked exactly like a Sega Genesis.
Yeah, I did not have one of those.
Yeah.
But I do go into things that I was not born for yet into this, so
right. Well, that
I know about. So.
For those of us that know, like the Sega Genesis was out at the same time as the Super Nintendo. That was the 16-bit gaming war was between those two. And this was exactly a Sega Genesis, except it had the Motendo label on. So I just thought that was even funnier too. Now, the part that I didn't find funny was when the machine came to life and it sent out all those tendrils and it's, to stick onto them and suck them into the gaming dimension. There was tendrils that went right into her eyeballs, and that, oh my god, yeah. I always hate eyeball stuff. And she had little metal spikes go right into her eyes, and I just went, ugh, yuck.
Yeah, eyeball stuff, body horror. I'm like, too. I'm like, I don't like it.
Oh, like that's just as bad as seeing someone getting tortured by stuff shoved up their fingernails.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, like, come on, do you guys have to show that? Ugh. Yeah. But let's keep going on to cameos because there might be more. I'm sure you came up with more than I saw, but there was a scene when they went to Genosha. And you could see a bunch of workers just doing slave labor, and we saw the Blob, clear as day. Everyone recognizes the Blob, but we saw a guy in a red suit, and not a lot of people know him. If you are a huge X-Men fan, you would recognize this very rarely used character, but his name is Sunfire. He was in the red suit, and he was he was the one shooting fire out of his hands. That's what he did. He shot bolts of flame, basically.
Yep.
So
yes, yeah, he's a Japanese mutant.
Mutant. Yeah.
That was introduced in the 70s, and yeah, he was only on the team very, very briefly then. But yeah, he shows up for stories here and now, whatever I'm trying to say, throughout the run all the way up to the present. Like, he's still in the comics now too, but he doesn't show up super often.
No, and he's never a big deal when he does. He's just kind of there, support character.
Yeah. In the same scene, there was also Domino in the back, and then
yes,
I also saw we only saw, like, in the foreground, there was someone working in, like, the blue and red outfit. I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be Thunderbird.
It was Thunderbird's butt.
Yeah.
That's what, his butt went by the screen. That's what you saw.
Yeah. But I could tell the outfit, so I'm pretty sure that was Thunderbird.
Yeah, exactly. Which is pretty cool to see. So I want to ask you about Jubilee here, because the part of why I was never really a big fan of hers, because I never really understood her powers. All I've ever really seen is that she can shoot fireworks out of her fingertips. And I never really understood, what's the point of all that? Like, that seems kind of useless. Yeah, you can shoot sparklers and things like that. So I could never really grasp why she became such an integral member of the team, because what is she going to do? I don't know. I want to ask you, what is the extent of her powers, and what more can you tell us about what Jubilee can do to make me understand why she's important to the team?
Yeah. So that's a lot of also what people think if they only knew, like, maybe coming from the 92 show and never reading too many of the comics. She's just known as the one who makes fireworks. But technically, so Jubilee can create what they call energy plasmoids or pyrotechnic plasmoids. She calls them her fireworks. That's what she refers to them to. But they're technically like little energy blasts. So they're technically they're like mini bombs, but not the same way like a character like Boom Boom makes her bombs as well. So Jubilee can actually, once she gets like more control over powers, she can control the size and the shape of them. She can direct them where to go. So she can kind of, not just in throwing, but she has like a little bit of it's not really telekinetic, but just for sake of ease of understanding it, she can kind of lead them where to go. And she can use them as basically like between energy beams, or she can use them as explosions. And she can vary the intensity of them. So they can be really small and just be like the little fireworks around her, like we see a lot. But if she concentrates, or sometimes if they're based on like emotional reactions, so like bigger anger or anything of that, they can be much more destructive. So there have been moments in the comics where she's used them to blind people, like whole groups of people. She's blown up an entire spaceship with them before. She can even detonate the plasmoids on kind of a subatomic level. If she really wanted to, she could basically use them as like a mini atomic bomb. So that's how and there's an issue that, and I believe one of the Generation X comics, where Emma Frost is like, if you knew your full potential, you knew that you could like literally create a bomb.
Okay, see, now that gives her a lot more substance and makes me respect her a lot more now, because I mean she's always been a young teenage character, so she was always she never got to go out on all of the missions with the team all the time, so I just never attached to her, because like I got my Rogue and my Cyclops. I'm good. I don't need this Jubilee. So, okay, but that makes a lot more interest then for her, which is cool. Good for Jubilee. Now, let me ask you about Mojo. You brought him up long before this episode came along. You'd already talked about him a little bit. Let's get some information on him now, because I want to ask you, what type of alien is he? What dimension is he from? And maybe just fill us in a little bit more on his story for those that don't know, because what I remember of him is he is just this wacky guy that's obsessed with game shows and TV from our world, and he always wants to recreate them on his own planet to entertain his people, because he's the great entertainer. I want to be known across the galaxy as as the one you go to be entertained, and that's his big thing. And he's always capturing heroes and stuff and putting them into contests and competitions so he can put it on his TV show.
Yeah. So Mojo, he's an alien. He's a being from a race they're just called the Spineless Ones. And the planet it's retroactively called Mojo World. I don't know if the name of the original planet is, but he's the one that like rises to power and stays in power, so he just renames it after himself.
And
Mojo World. It's
in our galaxy. It's not another dimension or anything, right?
So he's both an alien, like from a different planet, but he also rules his own pocket dimension as well, which is just called the Mojo Verse. Gotcha. So we mostly know the Mojo Verse is where pretty much most of the Mojo stories take place.
Okay.
And the Mojo Verse is basically like his own dimension that he outfits as basically a demented TV studio. Think of it in that way. Yeah. That he has full control over. So he sets out because his race, the Spineless Ones, like their like political power is basically like in the form of TV. Like the more ratings, the more power you have in like the TV world, the more hold you have over like political power. So Mojo's like always trying to stay at the top of that. So
it's actually kind of a fun idea. Like,
yeah.
TV ratings means you're more important.
So I'll get to like just kind of the like the cultural commentary on that, but. So basically, he creates all these different TV shows to satiate his audience, which he used to, like I said, essentially rule over the dimension because everyone is so hooked on the TV shows.
Right.
So it's a little bit similar to how, like in the DC universe, the Martians are all obsessed with Earth television. But on this side, the Mojo it's like to a much more extreme level.
Yeah.
So he's typically involved with the X-Men because he found that the mutants with their diverse array of powers worked really well in his broadcasts, and people loved them and kept wanting more. So, he often shows up in the comics to kidnap some of the X-Men, force them to work for him, or all of that stuff. So he's never been like a huge adversary. He's kind of more of like a nuisance. It's like, oh crap, Mojo again. Gotta go save someone. He's also created mutants of his own by like forcing birth or like doing genetic lab experiments on mutants. So one of those, which is where Longshot comes from. Yep. He was born in the Mojoverse specifically to star in his own TV show. So Mojo tends to use different forms of mind control or torture devices a lot to get them, the people that he kidnaps to stay. He manipulates a lot of our well-known characters before, and he's also created younger version of the X-Men that they call the X-Babies that he can fully control and grow them as slaves in his shows.
I remember those. Oh my god.
Yeah. So Mojo's he's one of those characters that it's kind of was created to represent almost like a notion in society. So he's been a metaphor for like the concerns and trends that people were seeing in television and pop culture that were starting to get raised in the 80s when he was introduced. So he's kind of like a caricature of like a studio executive or like someone that is focusing like solely on kind of like violent and sensationalized action for the sake of money, greed, like the cutting corners, the doing whatever it takes to make money, that kind of mentality that leads to like unsafe working conditions, because obviously all the dangers and stuff in his shows are real to the talent.
Yeah.
So, and I know we see like in this one, he talks about catering to certain demographics and like all of that, and accusing this one video games, but also TV of like making viewers dumber and like being like brain rot. So we see here that he's now pivoted to video games because in the 90s, that's kind of where a lot of the money and audience were starting to go to, was to the video games.
Hence Sega and Nintendo war. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And then back to just in this episode to the story point, we see Mojo's trying to entice Jubilee to stay and be the star of her own video game. So that means she doesn't have to grow up and she can keep replaying all of her fond memories that she's had with the X-Men. Right. He calls her the point of view character, which, she was to the original series, and she was one of those kind of younger teenage characters in the comics when she first appeared that like audience members could connect to going into the team for the X-Men. So it was very meta, very meta here in this one.
Yeah.
And she's, we see her turning 18, so she's kind of right on that coming of age on the cusp of adulthood, like a lot of people would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that could be part of why for this episode just felt, I guess immature would be a good way to describe it. Whereas the first couple were like, whoa, this is definitely the cartoon that was made for all of us adult fans that grew up with the original. This one just seemed to take a huge leap backwards to be solely for a younger audience. But
Mojo's definitely a immature character and villain to have too.
Yeah.
I want to do just a quick rundown of some of the things too in the video game world before we actually jump into the part when it turns into the 16-bit, because that's where all the fun stuff happens.
Yeah.
But when Mojo first appears, he's showing a hologram of stuff happening, and there's a shot of Wolverine fighting different members of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. So that was from the first Mojo Vision episode in the 92 series as well. So that was directly from that.
Cool.
There's a couple shows that Mojo runs through with X-Men characters in there, and they're all based on real shows that I am assuming are from the 90s. So there was Who's the Boss, Different Worlds, and then Divorce Court. And in this case, it was Divorce Court, Summers versus Grey.
Those are Who's the Boss and Different Worlds are 80s shows.
Oh, 80s, okay. Yeah. Those I was not familiar with those, but I assumed they were based on real life stuff.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah, it's just funny. I love that they're pulling stuff in from the old X-Men show and from real life TV shows. It just makes it fun.
And we also get a very quick Dazzler mention. So, because he says Dazzler had a gig, meaning he probably meant to get Dazzler instead of Jubilee as his first choice. But so she's actually was one of the ones that is more involved in a lot of the Mojo stories because she has a romance with Longshot in the comics.
Yeah, they did. And Dazzler's she's the original light controlling hero before Jubilee ever came around. I think that's also part of why I didn't like Jubilee, is because we already had Dazzler. Dazzler was cool. What do we need another light techie person for? But different though, right? She controls light, whereas Jubilee, like you just told us, is plasma balls.
Yeah, so Dazzler converts sound into light energy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she's a singer, dancer.
Yes.
So she can sing and basically power herself up.
Yeah, that's basically what she does. Yeah. She does a lot of the pyrotechnics you would see at a concert. Dazzler just does herself.
Yeah. So if you guys are fans of the 80s cartoons, do you remember Gem? Truly outrageous. Dazzler is basically...
Gem and the holograms.
Yeah, Gem and the holograms. Dazzler is the X-Men version of Gem. Yeah. Cool. Good information there for sure. One character we do get, because we brought her up before as one of the characters that was Morph. We get the real Spiral this time.
Yes.
And just as you said, she's working for Mojo, and she's in this episode. She's doing all the TV studio controls basically for him. But this time, she kind of goes against him and is helping Jubilee.
Yeah, so we kind of...
I was surprised by.
Yeah, we kind of see her as the only tech support happening.
Yeah.
There's kind of another meta dig there about how games have too many bugs these days because companies aren't willing to pay for proper tech support, and Mojo and Spiral are kind of having that argument of yeah, well, you'd have a bug if you didn't fire all the tech support, and then she's the only one left. So
it was cool to see the real Spiral though. But why do you think she was trying to help Jubilee? Was it just to damn you, you're not giving me enough help, so I'm going to help them instead? It was a kind of just a disgruntled employee type of thing.
Yeah, I think it comes from the disgruntled employee, but so she's kind of back and forth also in the comics. So sometimes she's working for Mojo of her own accord, but there are other times where, she's kind of been a part of Longshot has done slave rebellions where trying to get all the talent to rebel against Mojo and free themselves, and she's been a part of that too.
Right.
So she's been kind of off and on with Mojo, working for him and then rebelling against him. So I think it's in character for her.
Okay. Good. Well, let's dive into the actual game world here. I know you got a lot to say here. Where I had fun, I thought it was kind of neat because we see the Sega Genesis and we're talking about Motendo, they animated it in this 16-bit graphics era, just like how those old video games used to look. Yes. So it was kind of fun. It made me feel like, okay, you go to the arcade and there's that big X-Men 4-player co-op video game you could play, and they've done a Ninja Turtles version. They've done a Double Dragon and Simpsons. There's so many variants. Gauntlet of where 4 players could play together. So it was just, that part was fun to see, but I think you got a lot more actual story points that you pulled out of this than I was just kind of having fun with what was going on and trying to enjoy it as much as I could. So what do you got for us that was in there?
So I mean, I will go for just like kind of some background as to the references here, because there was a ton. Yeah. But I mean, this is definitely where I had like a lot of fun with the episode too. And I know, and I think you said you liked this stuff when you were talking about your intro, like you liked like the 16-bit and all of that, but I know you also said you didn't think things looked as good in certain points.
Well, the one scene I'll key in on is in the very opening sequence, that when they're all sitting around the breakfast table.
Oh, okay.
The way Magneto was animated, it looked like he was missing frames, and like he just looked awful. It looked glitchy and not polished. It just didn't look polished. Like they rushed through, or I don't know. That's the feeling I got. I can't complain about the 16-bit thing, because obviously it looks 16-bit. It looks old, but no. I meant like just the actual animation, like it was supposed to be. I'm like, man, something looks off this time. So
okay, because I was gonna say I was gonna have to like hard to disagree with you, because I thought all the video game stuff looked super cool.
Yeah, so, that's not what I was referring to, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that might come. There might have been a rush. I mean, a lot of animation does happen that way. I don't know what happens behind the scenes, but also I think it works the same way, like in a lot of our like live action shows and things. So if you think about like the Arrowverse shows, like you get one with like huge like action sequences and explosions, and then there'd be like 3 of like one location, nothing happening, because they'd have to save their budget for certain ones. So it could be a difference. Like that scene had to be all of them just sitting at a table, because then all of these scenes probably had a lot more budget put into them.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but yeah, to the 16 bits, this is like really fun, and I wasn't even alive when this was happening. But the background of it is really fun for hardcore fans. So the 16-bit, like the Sideswiper style of the video game, along with a lot of the enemies that show up with the Sentinels, and we see stuff in the Savage Land, which I'll get to down below when we get to the Easter egg section. But all of that. And with the big boss being Magneto and him kind of lording over the Earth, and you see Asteroid M. It was a direct reference to the 1993 Konami arcade game. There's a couple X-Men ones, but this one specifically was based on actually a failed pilot of an originally pitched X-Men animated series that was called Pride of the X-Men.
I remember that,
Yeah. So it was just one episode. The network passed on that one. But it reshaped the cartoon into what we know now as the X-Men, the animated series that we got.
Yeah.
And that arcade game was based on just that pilot episode. So there is a hilarious bit in that game where Magneto's, because it's made by Japanese animators and game makers, so there's a little lost in like to the English translations of things. But there's a hilarious bit where Magneto screams "Welcome to die" at the X-Men, and I was really waiting for someone to say that in the episode, but it never came. But we actually do see the physical console for the game later when Mojo pops out of it when he goes to attack them. So, but I have the clip of the "Welcome to die," and I just wanted to include it in here because it makes me laugh.
X-Men, welcome to die!
Welcome to die.
Yes.
Don't you love when the translation doesn't come out as way it's supposed to?
Yes. And if anyone listening has never heard that before, there you go. A little bit more X-Men history.
There you go. I played these games in the arcade. Like you said, Sideswiper. It's where your character is on the left side of the screen and you're continuously running to the right, and enemies are just coming at you. They like I said, they did so many different variants of that with so many different pop culture iconic characters, and they are all exactly the same kind of game. And you pumped in the quarters like crazy.
Yes, and there's a couple more Easter eggs and references throughout all that, but I'm going to wait till the Lockheed's Lair section because there are quite a few.
Cool. Sounds good. Well, from there we get a character. Until she said who she was, I did not recognize it, didn't even clue in at all. But it ended up being this older, almost grandma age version of Jubilee within the game. And I'm thinking, why would there be an old version of Jubilee within this video game? And why would Mojo allow her to even be there and help Jubilee escape and get out of this situation? So were you able to dive into that more or figure more out about that? Because I was thinking, old Jubilee, I don't understand.
Yeah.
Has she been trapped there all this time from another dimension? What's going on?
I think you zoned out during this part because they didn't explain it.
Maybe.
But so the older Jubilee explains that she was created as basically a digital beta tester for the game to make sure that it worked before Mojo brought the actual Jubilee into it. And so she is the only one that was left over from the beta version because she was able to basically hack the system and not get erased when the beta version was erased.
Okay, I remember her saying that on the last one left. Yes. I remember that. Okay.
So basically, she's just been hiding out as like rogue code in the game, I assume, until that point. And then once the actual Jubilee and Sunspot are brought in, she's just helping them at certain points. But Mojo wasn't letting her. She's just kind of doing it herself, hacking into the game. That's why he's having that argument with Spiral to try to fix the bug, because the older Jubilee is the bug.
Oh, okay. It all makes sense now. Yeah, I was confused big time there. Okay. So, was she created as an old Jubilee, or she's just been there so long that she's, even as a program, she's aging?
Yeah, what it sounded like is she was created as like the normal age, the Jubilee that we see, but she's been in there so long that she's learned new powers and aged up. Almost had like a little bit of a Tron feeling, like getting stuck in there.
Yes, okay. Now, there's a scene where the young and old Jubilee hold hands, and it looks like it doubles their power.
Yeah.
It made me think of the twins that we mentioned back in the first episode. Why can't I think of their names? The
Fenris. Yeah.
Yeah. And it looked like they doubled up their power, and then when the camera pulls back and you see them launching an attack at Mojo, there's like this nuclear symbol that gets drawn in the sky with their lightning plasma and all that kind of stuff, and they create this nuclear symbol that eventually takes out Mojo. So, wow, what's going on there? Is that something we know about in the comic books, or is this something new they threw out? Because I didn't clue into ever seeing that before. Jubilee being able to double up her power by, connecting to somebody else.
Yeah, so we haven't seen it in like that form of her connecting with the second person or like holding hands like with another version of herself. We haven't seen that.
Right.
But like you said, the nuclear symbol, like I said, she can create some atomic bombs at that level if she can. So basically it looked like she was kind of charging up a little atomic bomb to throw at Mojo there.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, because this older Jubilee looks like she knows a lot more tricks and how to control the power more, which is what Magneto was referencing, like at the very beginning of the episode, in like you need to learn to control your powers more, and Jubilee actually gets to kind of see that realization through this,
which is pretty cool.
Which is cool.
Yeah, she's inspired now of what she could do.
So yeah, this one was rollerblading around with her fireworks, and then she was using them as like blades so they could just spin, and they're chopping off Mojo's legs, which we've never seen like her do that in the comics, which is kind of pretty cool seeing that here. And
that's kind of what led me to ask you, what can Jubilee do? Because I'm looking at it going, oh, I didn't know she could do all that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about already this show showing really creative uses of powers, and I think this is that kind of showing that for Jubilee's side too, because those were definitely ways that I don't remember seeing in the comics, even of her like doing like the spinning blades or using them to roll around on as well.
Yeah. Oh, cool stuff.
And I loved the music under this part. The score has been like top notch so far in the show, but like under that it was like a very dramatic, almost like anime style, like Japanese video game vibe to it, and I thought it was super cool.
Right.
I really hope at the end of this they release the whole score after the season wraps.
That would be
Because
cool,
there's been so much, like, it's not just like stings of the same notes over and over like it used to be. It's like full out scores, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm sure they would. There's going to be a soundtrack for that eventually. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And so this is the like really deep cut. Like I had to look this up because I didn't know about it either. But so this older version of Jubilee is actually based on a storyline in the comics. But this was what we saw was a much like friendlier and less dark version of what happens in the comics. So in the comics, there's basically Mojo kidnaps an alternate Earth version of Jubilee to have her, serve as a slave on Mojo World as he does, but she doesn't escape. Like she ends up growing old there in the Mojoverse, and her name there is Abscissa. And so this was, which is actually a mathematical term that math nerds could probably figure out, but it basically means moving along the x-axis, so like basically her actually growing older. Okay. So for all the math nerds out there, that's what that means. And so this version of her, the older version, was actually voiced by Allison Court, who is the original voice actor for Jubilee. So it was almost kind of like a passing of the torch moment for the actor with the character, officially passing it off to Holly Chow.
Which was pretty cool. So if you didn't know that, even to find that out afterwards, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I did like that moment a lot.
Did you know it was her voice as soon as you heard it?
I did, only because I had seen it spoiled that she was going to voice this character.
Oh,
so, but it was nice. I like that they kind of built that in. And then Allison Court posted a picture on her Instagram of her with Holly, kind of doing a nice post of like passing it off to her too, which was cool.
Yeah, cool stuff.
So, and I think story point here, they kind of have the speech together of older version talking to younger version about like why she needs to go back to real life and all of that. And I think that's another meta comment on kind of the nostalgia factor of the show. Jubilee saying that being in the video game would be like the old times, wanting to live in the past, not growing up, and not trying to face responsibility because it's scarier. But, her older self telling her that she can't live in the past, but has to be open to the future. So, like I said, like there was a point to Magneto being right to that extent that she sees now, because she sees herself in more control and having more responsibility as her older self. So it feels like now that we're 4 episodes into this new show, there might be a little bit of a message for fans in there to remember that not everything is going to be like the 90s show, and we have to be open to the new and different things too, letting characters grow and change.
Subliminal messaging.
Little bit of meta there. So now that Jubilee is 18 and we see that, and she's had this experience, I feel like this is going to mean that she's going to be pushed a little bit more into official X-Men territory instead of just being kind of on the sidelines as she has, because in the originals, like, she almost never went on the field missions with them.
Right.
And so this kind of shows that she's ready, or at least about to be ready to take on that responsibility of becoming a full X-Man. So that's new territory for the show, which is really cool too.
And like you said, I think they're hinting at the show needs to grow and move on, and we can't expect it to be exactly the same, because that just wouldn't be it wouldn't be a smart play. Like the show and everybody needs to grow and mature, and so they can live up to what animation is like nowadays as to versus back then. I mean, when you watch the original X-Men 92, it is pretty childish, it's pretty young, and there's nothing, they don't tackle big serious topics too much. They do fly through a lot of things, so it'll be good. It's good for the show, I think. So I like that. I like how you pulled that out, that they're secretly laying down the message, and whether we like it or not, it's in there, and they're letting us know changes are coming. Yeah. So a point I have here about Sunspot, this bugged me, that he's been so worried about using his powers and being seen that even when they're in danger and Jubilee can barely help them, he still refuses to use his powers. And that's bugging me. Come on, buddy. Like, you're powerful. Look at the situation you're in. Nobody's going to see you. Help her out and get you guys out of this situation. But he doesn't. But he eventually finally fires one blast at Mojo in the end.
Yeah. Sunspot's never been, like, one of my favorites in the comics. Him as a character, he's always been a bit more on the temperamental side. And a bit out of touch because he comes from a rich family, so he's kind of used to just being safe from a lot of things, or being able to like pay his way out of things and not taking on the same responsibility or having like a team.
Okay.
So I think they're kind of really playing that up here as like his beginning point for what arc I assume he's going to go on this season.
Right.
And we do see that he has that fear of being exposed to his family, which is very real. But also to the point where we're seeing him just do absolutely nothing about it. He's mostly just thinking about himself. There was that one line where Jubilee's like, "Not everything's about you," and he says something about like, "Yes, it is." I don't remember the exact line. But so I'm sure that we'll see his journey be more about like becoming a team player, maybe seeing himself become more self-sacrificial throughout the season. And probably coming around to accepting himself more with these powers. Maybe we'll even see him like telling his parents. I don't know what will happen there, but you know, he does have that moment of almost dying in the video game. So that may be kind of like that flip point for him of his perspective on like if he used his powers, that wouldn't have happened. And yeah, he does have a responsibility to himself and others in these dangerous, actual real life dangerous situations.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the story ends up with them kissing.
Yes, it does.
So.
On her bed in their bedroom. Yep, she kissed him. They just survived a harrowing experience together, and quite often that makes sparks fly. And we know
like
she's good at that.
Literal, literal sense here. So I don't hate it. I don't love it, but you know, it's a fun little like teenage thing.
It was there right from the get-go that you knew it was coming. Something was going to happen with those two. They were flirting right off the bat, so yeah. Well, let's move in. I mean, we're going to talk about the second half of this episode, because everything we just covered was about the first 12 minutes, basically. Now there's the second half of the episode, which is all about Storm and Forge. So let's move into that, and we'll talk a bit about Storm.
Shadowcat, phase us in.
We got a new clip. All right, so Storm and Forge. Where are they? How much time has passed? Because he's already falling in love with her, or did he know her from before and he's loved her all this time and he just is finally admitting it? Like, I felt like something advanced really quickly here.
Yes. So to the first point, they're in Texas. They're at Forge's house.
Okay.
He's always been based in Texas in the comics too. To your second question, I have no idea. It's unclear. We don't know how much time has passed. I don't think they made like a good indication of that. Okay. In like my mind, it's probably been at least a week or two. You know, for her to travel to Texas, Forge finding her, getting all that kind of settled out. But who knows in animation
time? Could be longer.
time.
Like,
could be longer. Yeah, we don't know. Like, there's really. I wish there was maybe like a calendar or something where we saw like a month and the passing by or something, because I do not know the time.
Well, and even just up until he finds her, but then in the time that they're together, it seems like months have gone by, because he's like, she just comfortably steps in the machine. Like he's like, yeah, get in, let's try this, and she just jumps in, no problem, completely trusts him, and it just seems like a lot has happened between the two of them, because when he grabs her and he's like, Storm, I love you. I'm like, that sounds like he's been with her a long time. That's not, you don't say that to somebody you just met, like yesterday. So it sounds like some time has passed here, but they didn't express it well enough, I think. Right.
And they did have a very on-again, off-again romance in the comics, too. They fell for each other also pretty fast when he was nursing her back to health in the actual like Lifedeath comic that this is based on. So it seems like they're also just going full speed ahead on that one, on that point too. But yeah, again, hard to tell. Has it been a day? Has it been a couple months?
I mean, I get love at first sight. Sometimes you just get so infatuated with someone, but he didn't say it like that. He said it with a lot of depth and passion behind it.
Yeah.
And that tells me there's been some time that has passed.
As far as I remember, Forge in the original series, he was leading X Factor in their present day time. And I can't remember if Storm met him during that, because it was only like 1 or 2 episodes. And he helps out in the Felix Covenant episodes as well. But I don't remember like Forge and Storm sharing much screen time together. So if they had any like time to know each other before this, but it seemed like she didn't know him, because when he shows up at the bar, she asks who he is. So it feels like they didn't know each other beforehand. With that,
right.
So I think this is new for them. We're seeing a new relationship bloom between the two of them with this.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I like this section, but I really felt in this part is where the episode didn't need to be 2 parts. Where I would have liked to have more of a full episode to see this, especially like we're already talking about it, to show Forge and Storm together more, to kind of build up that relationship and to see a bit more of what's going on. So, because when Forge's like confession, both of them, the love confession, and also when he tells Storm like his part in making the gun and the technology. Especially if you don't know, like, I already knew it was coming because of the comics, and it felt like they were going down that path. But, like, if you don't know that, both of those things come out of nowhere a little bit, so.
Yeah, so I think the emotion of the moment doesn't hit.
Yeah.
You just don't feel it. You don't feel the history between these two. So I think it was a flop in storytelling.
Yeah, so. Into the story itself, now that you mentioned it, like basically this section is we see what Forge and Storm have been up to. Forge is trying to help figure out how to get Aurora her powers back.
Right.
And they haven't had too much success yet, but they're continuing to try. I did really love the one scene when the two of them are riding the horses together, and Storm is having that moment of pretty much feeling probably as close as she can to experiencing flight without actually being able to fly.
Yeah.
And we get the background on Forge a little bit more and like how his mutant powers work. So we get that explanation over dinner, which is good, because I know I explained it last week when you had the question, but for anyone who has no idea about Forge, that was kind of a good primer for explaining what he could do.
Right. Yeah, he basically, and you're right, that was a nice cinematography sequence with the riding the horses and stuff, and she was almost letting loose and just enjoying the moment, which I'm guessing at this point she's been sad and depressed for a long time.
Yeah. Since
losing her powers, and that was something she needed to just feel free and part of nature again. Yeah. So after all of that, we see on the wall of his little desert shack, there's a team photo there on the wall, and I picked up on some of the characters, but not all of the characters. We see Quicksilver, Forge, Havoc, and Polaris, and I think her name is Wolfsbane. Am I correct on that?
You are correct. Okay,
Wolfsbane, which is the werewolf-looking girl, and then there's 2 that I don't know. Gigantic, big, muscular old man in the back, and there's these triplets, I'm calling them. And they look visually familiar, and I can't remember their name or what their ability is. So that's where I'm going to ask you to fill it in for us.
Yep. Yeah, so this is a picture, we've mentioned it a couple times, but this is the picture of the X Factor team that he led. So we see them for, again, 1 episode in the original series, but it was just 1 episode. So you were very close on almost everyone. So those 2 that you didn't recognize, so his code name is Strong Guy, so you were actually close calling him Big Guy.
There's some creativity for you.
Yep. And then the other one, the ones that you are saying are triplets, so that is Jamie Madrox, who is Multiple Man.
Man, that's right. He makes copies of himself, and they all fight the same. Yeah.
Yep.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay. Awesome. So that was his X Factor team back then. Yeah, that was cool.
Yes. Yeah. And then so we see he's in his workshop, and Forge, like I said, has already been at work trying to make a machine that may get Aurora her powers back. There's also a little nod when she is stepping into the machine towards Storm's claustrophobia, because we know she has that fear of tight spaces. Just a very quick, just her body language with it, I think, was a nod to kind of that. But so they end up doing a test run, and it doesn't work. And we see Storm just kind of descending more into that hopeless feeling.
Yeah. And again, for him, I mean, I know his mutant ability is to understand machines really well, but he just met her the night before at the bar. Like, he's already going to have a machine fully built to help her? No. I think weeks have gone by. It has. Yeah, like...
So, that's what I assume too.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just a day, but who knows? But it does look like, to the conversation that's actually in my favorite scene later, they are going the same route in the comics. That is that Forge had some responsibility in the design of the weapon that affected Storm.
Right.
And he's helping her out to make up for that guilt. And, when they have that conversation, she understandably kind of freaks out on him because, I don't know how I would feel if someone who is helping me suddenly said that they were the reason that I was in that position.
Yeah, exactly. It's my weapon design that just about kills you, but I'm going to help you get over it.
Right.
Yeah. No, definitely. So, we'll come back around that when we hear our favorite scenes. But there's this other sequence when she's outside, and I think she's, after she gets mad at him, she's fleeing the scene and taking off. There's this owl thing that comes down, and the owl's talking, and it grabs her. And there was a lot that happened there, and I'm just thinking to myself, what is that owl creature? What's happening here? I was completely confused. What's the significance of this talking owl that is sort of mutating into half man, half owl as the scene's continuing? I know you got the information on what this owl is, so explain it away, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that was confused.
No, I highly doubt that too.
Okay.
Because I was watching and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Too. This is where I was like wholly surprised at what was going on, because I did not expect this to be the direction that they were going to take it. And this requires a lot of explanation to kind of wrap up who this is, what's going on. So I have
Oh boy.
Hang tight. I'm going to get into it.
Okay.
And I'm sure we'll get into it even more because I know there's a part 2 coming.
Yes.
In I think 2 weeks. I think we skip to one other episode and then we come back to Lifedeath.
Seems like, another 2-parter split episode, yeah.
So this owl creature, the demon, it is a creature known as the Adversary. So I'll give a little bit of broad backstory to this.
He did say that in here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So the Adversary is a demon from the spirit world that Forge originally accidentally summoned when he was fighting in the Vietnam War. So he fought in the Vietnam War and his unit was getting attacked and basically everyone was dying and he didn't know what to do. So he ends up summoning a portal to the spirit world because Forge, he is of Cheyenne heritage, and in his heritage, he was being trained as the shaman of his tribe. So he has some actual mystical abilities, but he tends to not use them or deny them a lot because he likes the technological world with his mutant ability. So he's kind of fighting the both sides. But in Vietnam, anyway, to save his unit, or more likely to avenge his unit, he summoned a portal with a bunch of spirits and demons to kill the unit that was attacking his unit. And that left open a portal for this adversary to come through from the spirit world.
Okay.
And so after that, that's kind of where it's left in that initial backstory. But sometime after the actual Life-Death storyline in the comics, the adversary shows back up again and ends up trapping Forge and Storm in another dimension that's completely devoid of human life except for them. And this is where, in the comics, Forge is actually able to figure out how to restore Storm's power because he has enough time to build a machine that works, because they're basically in kind of one of those like timeless dimensions. So what really surprised me about the adversary showing up here is that the adversary was the main antagonist in the Fall of the Mutant storyline in the late 80s.
Oh,
So,
man, I
yeah,
forgot
ringing
that.
a bell a little bit.
Well, yeah, because the Fall of the Mutants was in one of my pictures I put on the Facebook page. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar, this is when the X-Men sacrifice themselves to defeat the demon, to defeat the adversary, and they end up dying basically on public television. So like the whole world sees the X-Men dying, but they're secretly resurrected and end up operating in an underground kind of situation for a while in the Australian outback. And that kind of leads, because there's a whole outback era that they refer to, which happens after this.
Yeah. Oh, man, now I'm remembering. Okay.
Yeah. So when I saw when the creature said, like, I'm the adversary, I was like, hold on. Like, are we about to do a version of Fall of the Mutants in this season? Because
one
of
episode
the 9...
only, Abby. Only one episode.
Yeah, I know. One episode of it. Because of the 9 people that offer themselves to be sacrificed with the X-Men is also Madeline Pryor. She's there. Wow. She's one of the ones that dies and then goes to the outback with them. Yeah. So it feels like there's a couple pieces that are in place for a version of the storyline to happen.
Wow.
But that would be like intense. Like, we're already gone through a lot of intense storytelling, but if it like ends with like Fall of the Mutants, I'm like, that would be insane.
End of season 1, yeah, and then season 2 starts off in Australia. Holy.
Yeah, that or a whole new X-Men team. Like, I don't know. there's possibilities there. But then thinking more to this, so this is where I'm in like theorizing mode at the moment.
Okay.
So I mentioned that the adversary at one point in the comics traps Storm and Forge in another dimension when they're the only people.
Yeah.
So in this episode, we see at one point when Storm is riding away on the horse, like those red eyes kind of come up, and then she like falls, and then she's back into the house.
Right.
So at first, this is a side tangent, but I thought the red eyes were the Shadow King, which is another villain for Storm that she runs into a lot. So I was like, what's going on?
Oh, man.
But so looking back at that, and when I did my rewatch, Storm comments that she sees the same owl, like an actual owl, multiple times in the episode, like flying in the same pattern in the exact same way.
Oh, okay.
And that made me think that that was probably just the adversary the whole time, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.
Right.
Because we see, and I have a picture of it here in the notes. There actually another time when the owl pops up when they're in the dinner scene. It's sitting up in the rafters watching them.
God, that's spooky. I never noticed
that.
I
know. It's I had to lighten up this image to see it, but like someone pointed out online, and I was like, oh, I have to rewatch that to go see if that's true. And it's there. So anyway, I think like that was the adversary the whole time. And then there's also a moment when they're first riding the horses and they're overlooking a cliff, that cliff is just in the face of an owl. So going through all of that, I'm like, what if they're actually already trapped in the dimension and they don't know it, and they're just stuck there already?
Wow.
So that's my little theorizing, that they've just been stuck there.
They dropped enough hints. You could be right.
Yes. Huh. And then that could answer the time they're stuck in another dimension, so it doesn't matter how much time has passed.
It doesn't. Yeah. So maybe months have gone by. Yeah. That could be the simple answer out of that. Holy.
Yeah, but that's then where the episode leaves us off is, Forge gets bitten by the demon, and then it has a monologue to Storm, and it's being voiced by the same voice actress as Storm, so that's really interesting too.
Yes. Yeah, interesting. And we're not going to get into the second half of another episode.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. Okay. Let me ask you an important question, though. We touched on this at the top of the show. We basically got one episode of about 27 minutes split into 2. So that's like 2 extremely short episodes in an already short episode. What do we think of that, Shadowcat? Because I don't like it myself. I'm like, you already have a short episode. Why would you try to break that down even 2 more? Because you mentioned it earlier. And they now were forced to speed up the pace even more. And it allows for a lot less storytelling and a lot less character development when you're trying to squeeze everything in within 12 minutes. I hope they don't do this a lot. I don't know why they would choose to do that. Just tell the story in one episode. What do you got to do that for?
Yeah. Susan is not my favorite either. I mean, I've mentioned this a lot that I like breathing room in my storytelling and seeing things build up. And with like an animation like this, 22 to 30-minute episode can already sometimes be hard enough to tell one complete balanced story.
Yeah.
And these two were, completely separate stories, like also completely separate tones. That just didn't feel like the best choice maybe to pair. But I also have to take into account, like, I never know what's going on the editorial side of things. I'm not in writers' rooms or on that side. And I don't know where people's hands might be tied in terms of production, because I know there's lots of hand tying in production that come from the top. So I always want to try to look at these things through that perspective, whereas,
Right.
I put on my writer or director's cap a lot from a review perspective. So for me, I'm like, I would rewrite this like this because anything goes, because I have no limitations. But I know that's not the case in making actual TV. So maybe they just didn't get to all the stories that they wanted, and they had to make a compromise to still get to maybe certain story beats later in the season that we're going to see. And who knows what's all going to be in Life Death Part 2.
Yeah.
That maybe required them to have to do some sort of prelude to that here that they couldn't fit into all of the 30 minutes of that episode.
Yeah. It's got to be something. Like you said, with 10 episodes, maybe we're like, well, maybe we can split 10 episodes into 16 episodes if we split half of them in half. Yeah. Okay. We'll see. Hopefully they don't do it very often.
Yes.
Well, let's move into our new section called Lockheed's Lair.
Don't you agree?
You actually found a little Lockheed clip. He doesn't actually speak, does he?
No, he doesn't speak.
Yeah.
He's a little alien dragon.
Yeah. But at least we got a sound effect for him.
Yes.
All
so
right. What did you find in this episode?
So yeah, this is my extra Easter eggs that don't actually go into the plot wise of the episode.
This is the fun stuff that's just in there. Yeah.
So the first one was there was another little long shot Easter egg, because Jubilee actually had a long shot doll in her room before they go into the video game.
I didn't see that. Wow.
Yeah, it was sitting on the shelf by the console, so it was fun.
Okay.
Then when they first get sucked into the video game, when they wake up in the room and don't know what happened, there's a sentinel arm that comes through the wall and grabs Sunspot. So that's actually a direct reference to Night of the Sentinels Part 1.
Which is the opening episode of the original. You're right.
Yeah, because that's what happens to Jubilee in that one. So they're doing like all of the references with Sunspot in that place. And then right before they actually go into the 16-bit game, we see a like player select screen pop up.
Right.
So we see Jubilee and Sunspot on that, but then we also see little shots of Colossus, Magic, and Longshot on that one too.
As playable characters, you're right.
And then this one was my favorite Easter egg of the bit. So when they're going into the game right before the Sentinels attack, there's a wall behind them, and we see a wanted poster.
Right.
And this wanted poster is directly from the cover of Days of Future Past. So it's like almost down to the T, exactly everyone in the same position of what's on the poster. It's probably one of the most famous X-Men comic covers to date is the Days of Future Past, because it has the wanted poster and then Wolverine and the older Kitty Pryde on it in the front.
Right.
So, and this was when I said earlier that there's a very tiny Shadowcat cameo. It's this one, because she's on the poster.
Okay, I'm looking at the poster now. Which one is she?
She is the one right above Wolverine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
she's in her training uniform, because she was still like, she had been on the team for like one whole issue at this point. So it's very teeny tiny, but it's our first Kitty sighting. So
there you go.
Hopefully that means she's in this universe somewhere.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah, those are fun. Those Easter eggs are fun to see what else they're trying to sneak in and give nostalgic nods to. Let's move into our favorite scenes for this episode.
What's wrong, Cher?
You know what happens when I touch somebody. You want to end up in the hospital?
Maybe it's worth it, no?
Ugh.
So, I did struggle to find a favorite scene because there wasn't a lot in here that I think was really dramatic or meaningful. But I'm going back to almost the very beginning when Jubilee's wanting to plan some fun for her birthday. I mostly chose this scene in all honesty because Rogue gets a big speaking line here, and I just wanted to hear Rogue's voice again. But there is some humor here with Magneto groaning over them deciding to go to a video arcade. And I just like hearing him being so disappointed in that, because we talked about him wanting to, he'd rather train than be a goofy kid. And then it kind of transitions into Jubilee and Sunspot in her bedroom, and she's frustrated at Magneto's, desire to ruin her birthday. And she's like, I'm the birthday Big Mac here, and something about a side of fries. I don't know. We're going to hear it. It's just made me laugh. So there's two funny moments and a bit in that scene. So here it is. The birthday Big Mac, I called it.
Who's got two thumbs that blast fireworks and turns 18 today? Me.
Aw, happy birthday, Sweet Pea. Boy, do we got some surprises for you. But first, how do you want to celebrate the big 18th, huh? We are all ears.
Big shocker, I know, but let's go to the arcade. It'll be just like old times. What do we think?
You would have the Master of Magnetism seen in a bar of childish make-believe?
This is bogus! What's wrong with just one day where I don't have to freak out about the professor, or Jean and her clone, or Cyclops and his latest control issue? They aren't even here because they just had to go play mutant politics at the United Nations.
Genosha entering the UN is a big deal.
Small fries. I'm the birthday Big Mac.
There, so...
Yeah.
And I wanted to highlight that a little bit too, because it's a visual cue when she says, hey, let's all go to the arcade, and the entire team turns to look at Magneto, and that's when he goes, because he's just unhappy with that. But you can also really hear what I was talking about, that you hear how high-pitched Rogue's voice is. It has changed a lot.
Yeah. But so. Right, that was funny. And Jubilee's impression of Magneto is funny too.
That's funny too. So
yeah, you didn't even mention that Jean and Scott aren't even in the episode either.
That's true.
Last week I was like, oh, well, they have to have some sort of talk and hash it out because Jean was not Jean and Cyclops was married to a different woman. But it looks like they're pushing that off for another episode.
Yeah, well, they did say here that they're off at some
at the UN.
Yeah, doing something. Yeah, so cool. All right, what did you get for us?
Yeah, so mine is not also a heartwarming or super dramatic or inspiring scene. But mine comes from, I mentioned earlier, when Forge and Storm are having their conversation where Forge is confessing to her about being a part of taking her powers away, and then you get the I love you conversation and all of that. So I just really like the maturity and honesty aspect of it, having the back and forth between the two adults. It's a similar talk to what they had in the comics during the storyline too, and so I just really liked watching the tension between the two of them. And again, since I have the comics knowledge, I kind of had more of the background leading into it, so it was more weighted for me on that side, and I called this one Fool's Folly.
Oh, you're still working on the machine. Why is fixing me so important to you?
Storm. After the war, I didn't have the resources to build what I so easily saw in my mind. The Defense Department offered to help me, as long as I helped them build some devices. Devices that could be used to neutralize dangerous mutants.
No. You made these?
No, a scientist in Scotland did. Using my early designs, rough strokes at best. I left the government by then.
You, of all people, should know the perils of trusting those in Washington.
That's not fair. I was hurting, lost, bitter. I gave up. If I told you the truth in Dallas, you wouldn't have let me help you.
So you lied, my weaver of lies.
It hasn't all been lies. This is not a lie.
No, don't you dare.
I could live forever, and still my endless imagination would never conceive of a thing as perfect as you.
A perfect path to your redemption.
You are a goddess. Powers be damned. How do you not see that? Aurora, look at me. Look. I'll say it once. Just once. Then you can go or you can stay, but I love you.
You meant to make me a goddess. Instead, you have fashioned a fool.
I forgot she smacks him.
Yes.
Storm, I love you.
Yeah.
Not the reaction you want when you express your feelings for somebody.
Yeah. That actually, the conversation, listening to it again, actually sparked another reference that I forgot about. Because he referenced about a scientist in Scotland. And there's another, when we see the picture of like X-Force, there's another picture on that corkboard that there's someone's face is hidden behind like a piece of paper, but we see Forge in his soldier uniform with a scientist and then another guy. So actually, that was good because I remember that now. So the scientist that he's talking about is probably the scientist in Scotland that he referenced there, because the scientist in that is Dr. Adler, who is in the original series when we first go to Muir Island. It has nothing to do with Moira, but it's in the first Apocalypse episode when Rogue wants to go try to find a cure for her powers, but it ends up being Apocalypse is trying to make his horsemen, and all of this stuff is happening, and Dr. Adler would never see the real one because that ends up being Mystique in disguise. So that was like a really wild like throwback to that one episode. But then the guy that we can't see the face of, he's in like a black and pink uniform. And so I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Bastion. And so Bastion, if you don't know that name, he is not even like a human. He is mixed of the Sentinel Nimrod, who is a futuristic Sentinel, and then Master Mold. And so he, so he is like the head of the, what's it called? The Zero Tolerance, whatever it's called, Operation Zero Tolerance. That's what it is in the comics. Which is like where the government is sent to build and send Sentinels out to basically kill every mutant. And so I was thinking of that and how like the last couple episodes are called Tolerance's Extinction. And we don't know who the buyer is yet from the first episode. And we know that there's probably another Master Mold factory and other stuff happening with Trask in the background. So I'm thinking Bastion could be showing up here in the next couple of episodes, and he might be that mysterious buyer that we don't know anything about yet. So theorizing off of a very tiny Easter egg in the background.
You might be falling victim to overthinking this.
Yes, I am. I am that person, but it's fine.
Me and Vizsla do that on The Mandalore all the time, and none of our deep theories ever come true. Yeah. I feel it. Don't worry. Good stuff. All right, let's remind everybody that they can support the show if they want to check out our Patreon page. This is how you do that.
If you'd like to support our podcast, you can do so at our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/tomorrowslegends.
I could just phase through the gizmo and quietly short it out.
Laser guns seemed fitting for this episode.
Yes.
Video games. All right, we got some feedback this week, and I'm going to kick it off with a YouTube comment from Ken from Chicago. Yes, our show is on YouTube. It just automatically gets sent up to our YouTube channel. Just go to Tomorrow's the Legends podcast, and you will see every single episode in video form, but it's basically just an audio file. It's just a static image, and you can play the audio file there. There is a video show that we do. Sometimes I'm just really behind on the editing because video editing takes way too much time. So I haven't even done any of the Jupiter's Legacies one there, but we do have a lot of videos. So you can check that out on YouTube and like it, subscribe to it, whatever. Help us get the metrics up so that the show starts getting viewed more. Anyway, Ken from Chicago has found us on there, and we hear from Ken quite often, usually from Twitter's where Harley's pulling his comments from, but for some reason he's on YouTube this week. And he says, I think he's talking about last week, that was brutal that no one stood up for Mom Jean. Then again, maybe it reflects just how they are used to mind games they've been through over the years. I agree. Crunching down the whole Madeline Pryor Inferno arc into 30 minutes is a lot. But then again, X-Men have a ton of stories to draw from, so to get them, they are going to have to do a ton of abbreviation. Although I'm surprised they didn't do the Dark Phoenix storyline before the Goblin Queen, unless they did Dark Phoenix back in the 90s. Speaking of evil wives, Martin's Patty Spivot has just turned out in the multiverse as Anissa in Invincible as a guest character. And I was like, what the heck is he talking about? So I looked up Invincible, I looked up Patty Spivot, which is Chantel Van Santen, and she did guest as a voice actor on that show for one character. Chantel Van Santen is who played Patty Spivot on The Flash, is who I was totally enamored with, and yeah, there you go. I wish she had been with Flash the entire time instead of Iris, because they had chemistry, for sure.
Yeah, and to his question about unless they did Dark Phoenix back in the 90s, yes, they did. So they have done Dark Phoenix before doing the Goblin Queen story.
Which is probably why we get a hint of it in the opening sequence.
Yes, yes.
Gotcha. Good stuff, Ken from Chicago. Fun to have you on here. Next up is X-Force 11.
Well, hello, X-Men fans. It's Jeff, X-Force 11. And I wanted to give some background. I grew up reading the New Mutants that then became the first version of X-Force. And New Mutants is what got me into the X-Men genre. And so it's really cool seeing Sunspot here in X-Men 97 and getting to see a little bit different take on his character. And this love story with Jubilee is very interesting. It's kind of interesting here we're dealing with her 18th birthday, and because of comics, the characters don't age that much. They age very slowly. Again, I grew up with the New Mutants who, when I started out, were a little bit older than me, but I felt like I grew up with them and Kate Pryde. And yet in the comics, they would be later 20s, post-college age, and you have the older group of the original X-Men maybe being in their 40s. So, they haven't aged a ton because of comic book lore. But, now in the comics, Jubilee is a mother, and she has grown in so many ways. And so it's interesting to look at age being presented here in her growing up and seeing this older version of herself in video game land and giving her an idea of what powers and abilities she might have if she grows into them. And so I thought that was an interesting take, and I also enjoyed the Storm and Forge aspect of things, of him really revealing that he was the one that kind of led to her being powerless, and their love story and the adversary being brought in. So I'm really enjoying this series and how they can take a short episode and make both the A story and the B story feel powerful, and just loving what they're doing. All right, those are my thoughts. X-Force is out.
Well, I am glad you found a lot more enjoyment in that one than I did X-Force, and it's because of your connection. And I think you're probably one of the only people I have ever heard say, my interest in the X-Men began with the New Mutants. That's crazy to me. I've never heard that before, so that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah. I was X-Men and then New Mutants, so...
Yeah.
I think as most people were.
Yeah, so just fun. That's interesting, but I'm glad he found a lot to like. Maybe my 6 is a little bit harsh for this episode, but I was just trying to be honest. But good thoughts, X-Force. Glad you're with us and liking the show. And next up, the last of our feedback is JJJ.
Hey, X-Maniacs. It's me, J. Jonah Jameson. Taking a break from exposing that wall-crawling menace to give you the lowdown on the X-Men 97 episode Motendo / Lifedeath Part 1. Man, I ain't even going to try to tell you that I've been a day one Jubilation Lee fan. I mean, if this was 1992 and we were listening to characters I would have wanted to see featured in an episode, Jubilee would have been pretty low. Somewhere right behind good old Leech. But I actually appreciated her being featured here. It served 4 purposes as far as I'm concerned. First, it gave the audience a real chance to see how much she's grown since Night of the Sentinels. 2, it gave her a sneak peek at the awesome potential of her powers, and to be quite honest, that cool AF goth gear that future Jubilee / Abscissa was wearing. She'll be much more than Sparkle Fist in the future. Number 3, it gave OG Jubilee voice actress Allison Court a really cool way to come back to the show, and I thought that was a really nice gesture by the show.
Yeah.
Number 4, it was a good fun break from the heavily dramatic episode we just had. But it still had a great message about it, about growing up, what's important to hold on to, and what we sometimes have to leave behind. And besides, the Mojo world is just good cartoon fun. I mean, the 8-bit cartoon video game animation took me right back to playing X-Men on my Sega Genesis. That game is hard as crap, by the way. I also love the TV references, from Who's the Boss to A Different World, which is one of my all-time favorite shows, and Divorce Court with Summers and Gray. And quite honestly, I can't wait to get to see them on screen again, too. And bonus, we got to see Jubilee and Roberto sitting in a tree. Kissing. Jubilee is growing up. It's fun to see. All right. Okay. On to Life Death Part 1, which is obviously the more heavy episode. And let me tell you right now, this episode felt like a pretty cool love story until Forge's admission that he was responsible for making the tech that took Storm's power. Talk about a WTF moment. And then that freaking bonkers arrival of the adversary. And I'll be quite honest with you, I mean, I watched the show growing up, but I have no freaking idea who the adversary is. I'm more of a cartoon guy, not a comics guy, so if it's a character from the comics, I have absolutely no idea who it was. When that thing showed up, I'm like, this thing is going off the rails, and I kind of like it. So I have absolutely no idea where that storyline is going, and I am quite intrigued. All right. While on the surface, these 2 episodes don't feel like they have a lot in common. They sort of both deal with evolution as far as I'm concerned. Jubilee is evolving into an adult and much more responsible member of the team, and Storm is having to evolve into more than her ability to control the elements. So in that respect, they serve as a perfect pairing of episodes because, I mean, if nothing else, the X-Men theme has always been about evolving, because that is the basis of mutation, right? So anyway, I can't wait to talk about the next episode with the rest of you X-Maniacs. Anyway, this has been J. Jonah Jameson telling it like it is. Now here's your headline: Mass Menace Terrorizes Town. Print
it. Carrie, my man, you're always so entertaining. Thanks for the laugh. Many of them. I'm right there with you about. I love, because you and me are right in tune with our age range and the things we grew up with, and knowing those video games on the Sega Genesis. So yeah, totally, man. I know you there. Same thing. I'm gonna say I'm glad you found a lot more in this episode than I did. Maybe I shouldn't have waited till it was like 12:30 at night when I finally got to it. It was the last thing I got to. Wednesday's a heavy TV day for me. We got The Bad Batch, we got Survivor, The Amazing Race, and X-Men, and I got to fit all of that in and get the show prepped. And because I run a Survivor pool, I run an Amazing Race pool. I got to prepare notes for The Bad Batch, and I got to prepare the entire X-Men show because we record the next day. So it's a heavy day. And I think that late at night, I just didn't. Maybe I'll rewatch it and see if I can see what you guys were all finding so much to love in it, because I'm glad you did.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, just the amount of conversation we had out of it. Maybe there was always more there, or maybe you found more fun with all the strange references and Easter eggs that were packed into that, like I did.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's the role of that's what's great when you have a co-host, because you can just bring up stuff that the other one's missing or fill things in. That's what's good. It's good to have a good tandem that way. So
yeah,
much appreciated. And our feedbackers always bring out stuff that we never mentioned, so it's good.
Yeah, to what Carrie said, good on him for being looking at the story from a different perspective and saying that these things had in common, because to me I was like, these are two opposite stories, but for bringing in the evolution theme and the evolving and the growing past, letting things change and grow back into that. So really enjoyed that.
He's always been good at doing that, pulling out the underlining meaning of what's happening. Yes. So,
and hope you know a little bit more about the adversary now listening to this.
Shadowcat filled you in. You should. I know more now. I didn't know who that was either. Yeah, some freaky owl creature thing. Yeah, so good stuff, everybody. Thanks for all the feedback. If you want to join the show, guys, and speaking of, I'll get to what the next episode is about in just a moment. But if you want to join the show, this is what you got to do.
If you would like to be a part of the show, you can send in your feedback to tomorrowslegendspodcast@gmail.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at Tomorrow's Legends. We'd love you to join our Facebook page at facebook.com/groups/Tomorrow's Legends and become part of the community.
And listen to that. I guess we might have to get Dan to re-record that, because we're no longer on Twitter. It's not called X, but nobody cares anymore. Who uses?
I still call it Twitter.
Yeah, it's but and so many people have left it since the buyout. That doesn't really matter. So whatever. I'm never on there. That's Jess's domain. So looking at the next episode, episode 5 is called Remember It, and it is something about Genosha.
Nice.
So yeah, so it looks like some of the team goes to Genosha, and then there's a behind-the-scenes press event that risks airing the X-Men's dirty laundry. So, so it looks like there's two stories being told in one episode, but it's not an actual split episode. So we'll see how they handle that. And then the episode after that is a full-on Lifedeath Part 2.
All right.
So I think
cool. So we get Genosha, and then we get to see what the heck the adversary is doing.
Exactly. Exactly. All right, guys. Well, good stuff. It's good episode and good chat, Shadowcat. We will see you guys in a week. This is Havoc signing off.
And this is Shadowcat. I survived the experience. Hope you did too.
Tomorrow's Legends is not affiliated with CBS, Warner Brothers, HBO, or the CW. We're a fan-made podcast for entertainment purposes only and are part of the Cybercast network. Be sure to check out our partner shows, The Mandalore and Dive into DC, covering your favorite Star Wars and DC Comics properties. Thanks for listening.